This extensive period is divided into three main phases: the Paleolithic, or Old Stone Age, Mesolithic, or Middle Stone Age, and Neolithic, or New Stone Age. The Paleolithic period witnessed the emergence of early hominins who first began using stone tools. These tools included sharp flakes and hammerstones, which allowed early humans to hunt, butcher animals, and process plant materials more effectively. Homo habilis, and later Homo erectus, played critical roles during this time. Homo erectus, in particular, achieved notable milestones. It was the first species to control fire, which greatly improved cooking, safety, and social interaction. This species also became the first to migrate out of Africa, spreading across parts of Asia and Europe. During the Paleolithic period, early humans lived in small, mobile bands that relied on hunting and gathering for survival. Cave paintings, such as those found in France, suggest a growing sophistication in artistic expression and perhaps spiritual or religious thought. These early symbolic activities hinted at the evolving cognitive abilities of Homo sapiens, who emerged around 300,000 years ago. Anatomically modern humans eventually replaced other hominin species like the Neanderthals, likely due to a combination of competition, interbreeding, and adaptability. The Mesolithic period, which began around 12,000 years ago, served as a transitional phase between the Paleolithic and Neolithic ages. During this time, the last ice age came to an end, dramatically altering global climate and ecosystems. Humans adapted by developing more specialized tools, including microliths, which could be attached to wood or bone handles to create arrows and spears. Fishing and small-scale animal domestication became more common, and some groups began forming semi-permanent settlements near rivers, lakes, and coastlines. There is evidence that smaller-scale violence and territorial disputes occurred during this time as well. The most transformative period of the Stone Age was the Neolithic era, which began around 10,000 BC. It ushered in the agricultural revolution, arguably one of the most pivotal events in human history. Societies in regions like the Fertile Crescent, which includes modern-day Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, China's Yellow River Valley, and Mesoamerica began cultivating crops such as wheat, barley, rice, and maize. Domestication of animals, including sheep, goats, and cattle, provided a steady source of food, labor, and materials. These innovations enabled the growth of permanent settlements and led to significant population increases. With agriculture came the development of complex societies and early forms of governance. The Neolithic village of Çatalhöyük in present-day Turkey is one of the earliest examples of urban planning, featuring interconnected houses, shrines, and communal storage areas. Another prominent Neolithic site is Jericho, located near the Jordan River, which had defensive walls and a population numbering in the thousands. Technological advancements during the Neolithic included polished stone tools, pottery, weaving, and the construction of megalithic structures. One of the most iconic of these is Stonehenge in England, whose precise construction and astronomical alignment continue to intrigue researchers. Despite its lack of written history or monumental empires, the Stone Age laid the foundations of human development that would shape the future of the world. This age witnessed the rise of the world's first true civilizations. Urban centers, writing systems, organized governments, large-scale warfare, and monumental architecture all emerged during this period, forever altering the trajectory of human societies. The Bronze Age began at different times across the globe, with the earliest examples found in the Near East around 3300 BC. One of the first and most influential civilizations to emerge was Sumer, located in southern Mesopotamia, or modern-day Iraq. The Sumerians developed cuneiform, the earliest known system of writing, which was initially used for administrative and economic records, but later expanded to literature, law, and science. Cities like Uruk and Ur became powerful centers of trade and governance, ruled by kings who claimed divine authority. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known literary works, comes from this region and reflects early human concerns with mortality, heroism, and the role of the gods. In Egypt, the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BC under the pharaoh Narmer resulted in the beginning of the early dynastic period. The Egyptian civilization would go on to construct some of the most long-lasting monuments in history, including the pyramids of Giza during the Old Kingdom. The pharaohs were regarded as divine rulers, and Egyptian society was deeply religious. Advances in medicine, engineering, and mathematics, along with the development of hieroglyphic writing, made Egypt one of the most remarkable Bronze Age civilizations. To the east, the Indus Valley Civilization, which flourished from around 2600 to 1900 BC, in present-day Pakistan and northwest India, created highly organized cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. These cities featured grid layouts, sophisticated drainage systems, and standardized weights and measures, all evidence of a highly centralized and technologically advanced society. Although their writing system remains undeciphered, the Indus people were extensive traders and possibly had contact with Mesopotamia. In China, the Shang dynasty, which began around 1600 BC, left behind a wealth of archaeological material, including early forms of Chinese writing. The Shang rulers controlled large territories through a feudal system and frequently conducted wars to expand their influence. Bronze played a significant religious and political role in Shang society, symbolizing power and legitimacy. The Minoans on the islands of Crete and the Mycenaeans in mainland Greece were major Bronze Age cultures in the Aegean. The Minoans, centered at Knossos, were skilled seafarers and artists with a writing system known as Linear A. Their civilization declined after a devastating volcanic eruption at Thera around 1600 BC, which likely contributed to their vulnerability to Mycenaean conquest. The Mycenaeans adopted and modified Minoan culture, using Linear B script and building fortified palace complexes. They are considered the precursors of later Greek civilization. Throughout the Bronze Age, war and diplomacy were constant themes. The Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BC between the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II and the Hittite king Muwatalli II is one of the earliest battles in recorded history, with detailed accounts from both sides. It ended in the world's first known peace treaty. The Hittites, based in Anatolia, were a major military and political force, known for their chariot warfare and legal codes. The Bronze Age came to a violent and mysterious end in many regions around 1200 BC, in which many major cities were destroyed. Loss of literacy was abundant, and populations were displaced. Historians refer to this as the Late Bronze Age collapse. Theories for this widespread downfall include natural disasters, drought, internal rebellions, and invasions by the so-called Sea Peoples. Despite its rough end, the Bronze Age introduced the foundations of statehood, codified law, organized religion, and international trade. It was a time when human beings first built empires, wrote literature, and mapped the stars. The achievements and lessons of this era shaped the course of history, paving the way for the rise of Iron Age civilizations. Iron, being more abundant and durable than bronze, allowed for stronger weapons and agricultural tools, which in turn contributed to population growth and territorial expansion. After the Late Bronze Age collapse, there was a power vacuum that allowed smaller and previously marginalized societies to rise. One of the most prominent of these emerging powers was the Assyrian Empire in Mesopotamia. By the 9th century BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire had established itself as the most dominant military power in the Near East. They employed iron weapons, siege tactics, and a well-developed system of roads and communication to maintain a vast empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. In the Levant, smaller kingdoms also flourished. The Israelites established the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, with Jerusalem becoming a political and religious center. The Philistines, often in conflict with the Israelites, were another significant group in the region. These coastal people likely had Aegean origins, and played a key role in the Iron Age geopolitics of Canaan. The Phoenicians, centered in cities like Tyre and Sidon, along the coast of modern-day Lebanon, became known for their maritime skills and expansive trade networks. They are credited with developing one of the first phonetic alphabets, which would later influence Greek and Latin scripts. The Phoenicians established colonies throughout the Mediterranean, including the powerful city of Carthage in North Africa. In Anatolia, after the rise of the Hittites, a new group known as the Phrygians rose to prominence, followed by the Lydians, who are credited with inventing coinage around the 7th century BC. This innovation revolutionized trade and commerce, allowing for more standardized and efficient economic transactions. Meanwhile, to the east, the ancient Iranian plateau saw the rise of the Medes and later, the Persians, who would go on to form one of the greatest empires of the ancient world. In the Indian subcontinent, the Iron Age is associated with the later Vedic period, during which the Indo-Aryan societies transitioned to settle agriculture and urbanization. The caste system became more rigid, and the foundations of classical Hinduism were laid through texts like the Upanishads. China's Iron Age corresponds to the latter part of the Zhou dynasty, specifically during the Eastern Zhou period. This era included the Spring and Autumn period, a time of political fragmentation and intellectual flourishing. It saw the early teachings of Confucius and other philosophical traditions like Taoism and legalism. Although the Zhou kings retained symbolic authority, real power was held by feudal lords who waged constant wars for dominance. In Europe, the Iron Age began later in the Near East but had significant cultural developments. The Hallstatt culture in Central Europe and the La Tène culture were the early and high points of Celtic civilization. These societies were tribal but well organized, with skilled metalworks and elaborate art styles. Warfare became more intense and large-scale during the Iron Age, driven by the superior quality and availability of iron weaponry. Battles were more deadly, and empires grew more aggressive in expanding their borders. The political landscape of the ancient world became increasingly complex, with states forming alliances, waging wars, and engaging in diplomacy. One of the most significant conflicts of this era was the series of Assyrian campaigns against rebellious states and rival powers, culminating in the eventual collapse of the Assyrian Empire around 612 BC due to a coalition of Medes, Babylonians, and others. By 500 BC, the foundations for the classical civilizations of Greece, Persia, India, and China had been laid. The most influential civilizations of this era was ancient Greece. By 500 BC, Greek city-states such as Athens, Sparta, and Corinth had grown in wealth and political complexity. Athens developed the earliest known form of democracy, albeit limited to free male citizens, while Sparta maintained a militaristic oligarchy. The Greeks famously united to repel Persian invasions during the Greco-Persian Wars from 499 to 449 BC, with critical victories at battles such as Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea, with these conflicts preserving Greek independence. The 5th century BC saw the golden age of Athens. During this time, great strides were made in architecture, drama, history, and philosophy. Thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle laid the intellectual groundwork for Western thought. However, this period of prosperity was cut short by the Peloponnesian War from 431 to 404 BC, a brutal conflict between Athens and Sparta that ultimately led to the decline of Athenian power and Greek unity. In the aftermath, Greece fell under the influence of Macedon, led by Philip II and later his son, Alexander the Great. Alexander launched one of the most successful military campaigns in history, conquering Persia, Egypt, and parts of India by the time of his death in 323 BC. His conquest spread Hellenistic culture across 3 continents and led to the blending of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian traditions, a cultural fusion known as Hellenism. Meanwhile, in Italy, the Roman Republic was rising. Established in 509 BC after the overthrow of the Roman monarchy, the Republic was characterized by a complex system of checks and balances, with power shared between consuls, the Senate, and citizen assemblies. Rome expanded through a mix of military conquest and diplomatic alliances, gradually dominating the Italian peninsula. The Punic Wars against Carthage, specifically the Second Punic War from 281 to 201 BC, cemented Rome's position as a major Mediterranean power. By the 1st century BC, the Republic faced internal crises, power struggles, civil wars, and the ambitions of military leaders like Julius Caesar led to its collapse. Caesar's assassination in 44 BC was followed by more turmoil, culminating in the rise of his grandnephew Octavian, later known as Augustus. In 27 BC, Augustus became the first Roman emperor, ushering in the Roman Empire in a period of relative peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana. The Roman Empire became one of the most powerful and enduring empires in history. It stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia and from the Rhine to North Africa. During this era, Roman law, engineering, architecture, and culture reached extraordinary heights. The Romans built extensive road networks, aqueducts, and monumental structures such as the Colosseum and Pantheon. Latin literature flourished with writers like Virgil, Ovid, and Cicero, whose works would influence European education and philosophy for centuries. Religion also underwent major transformations during the classical era. In India, the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, spread throughout the subcontinent and beyond, forming the basis of Buddhism. Hinduism too evolved from its classical form, with the writing of some of its most important texts. In China, Confucianism became the guiding philosophy of the Han Dynasty, which ruled from 206 BC to 220 AD and established a strong, centralized state built on meritocratic bureaucracy and Confucian ethics. Christianity emerged in the Roman province of Judea in the 1st century AD, with it spreading rapidly despite early persecution. Key figures such as Jesus of Nazareth, the Apostles, and early church fathers played central roles in its development. By the time of Emperor Constantine's conversion and the Edict of Milan in 313, Christianity had gained enough followers to become a significant force. In 380, Emperor Theodosius I made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. The classical era drew to a close with the gradual decline of the Western Roman Empire. Internal decay, economic troubles, and invasions by Germanic tribes weakened the empire over time. In 476, The last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the barbarian chieftain Odoacer, while the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued for another 1,000 years. The fall of Rome resulted in the end of classical antiquity in the West. Western Europe, the early Middle Ages began with the fragmentation of Roman authority and the rise of Germanic kingdoms. The Franks, under the leadership of King Clovis in the 5th century, established a powerful realm in what is now France and Western Germany. Later, under Charlemagne in the 8th and 9th centuries, the Carolingian Empire expanded significantly, uniting much of Western Europe. Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III in 800, reviving the idea of a Western Roman Empire and strengthening the ties between the church and state. The Roman Catholic Church became a unifying force in Europe, with the Pope holding spiritual authority over millions. Monasteries preserved classical knowledge and became centers of learning and manuscript production. Meanwhile, Eastern Orthodoxy flourished in the Byzantine Empire, whose capital, Constantinople, was a beacon of wealth, art, and learning. Islam also played a significant role during the Middle Ages. The religion, founded in the 7th century by the Prophet Muhammad, spread rapidly across the Middle East, North Africa, and into Spain. The Islamic caliphates, Umayyad and Abbasid, presided over a golden age of science, mathematics, philosophy, and medicine. Cities like Baghdad and Cordoba became intellectual hubs, where scholars translated and preserved Greek, Roman, and Persian texts. Islamic Spain saw a flourishing of art, architecture, and multi-religious cooperation. The Crusades were also a defining series of events during the High Middle Ages. Beginning in 1096, European Christians launched several military campaigns to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control. The First Crusade successfully captured Jerusalem in 1099, but subsequent crusades had mixed results and led to immense bloodshed. The Crusades also stimulated trade and cultural exchanges between Europe and the Islamic world, exposing Europeans to new ideas, technologies, and goods. In Northern and Eastern Europe, various kingdoms and cultures emerged. The Vikings raided and settled across Europe from the 8th to the 11th centuries, eventually establishing states such as the Danelaw in England and the Kievan Rus in what is now Ukraine and Russia. Over time, many Viking leaders converted to Christianity and became integrated into European feudal systems. Feudalism became the dominant social and economic structure across medieval Europe. Under this system, kings granted land to nobles in exchange for military service, and peasants worked the land in return for protection. Castles, knights, and chivalry were defining features of feudal society. The medieval period also saw numerous tragedies. One of the most devastating was the Black Death, which swept through Europe between 1347 and 1351, killing an estimated 1/3 of the population. This pandemic, caused by the bubonic plague, had profound effects on society, weakening the feudal system and increasing wages for laborers. The 100 Years' War between England and France from 1337 to 1453 was a prolonged and brutal conflict over claims to the French throne. It introduced new military technologies such as the longbow and gunpowder weapons, signaling the beginning of the end for traditional knight-based warfare. During this time, figures like Joan of Arc rose to prominence. A peasant girl turned military leader, Joan became a French national hero before being captured and executed by the English in 1431. Invention and intellectual growth challenged the notion of this era as purely regressive. The establishment of medieval universities in cities like Paris, Oxford, and Bologna fostered new scholarship in theology, law, and philosophy. The works of scholars like Thomas Aquinas attempted to reconcile Christian doctrine with classical philosophy. Technological advancements, including the heavy plow, windmill, and mechanical clock, improved agriculture and daily life. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century revolutionized communication and learning, helping usher in the Renaissance. By the late 1400s, Europe was on the brink of a major change. The fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 resulted in the end of the Byzantine Empire. Meanwhile, exploration of the Atlantic by Christopher Columbus opened new trade routes and initiated the Age of Discovery. The medieval era concluded as Europe transitioned into the Renaissance, a new age of scientific discovery, secular thought, and global exploration. One of the defining features of the early modern era was the Age of Exploration. European powers, driven by a desire for wealth, trade, and territorial expansion, embarked on maritime expeditions that connected the world in unprecedented ways. With Portuguese explorers, such as Vasco da Gama, opened up sea routes to India, while Christopher Columbus, sailing for Spain in 1492, reached the Americas. These discoveries initiated the Columbian Exchange, a vast transfer of plants, animals, people, and diseases between the Old and New Worlds. While the exchange enriched European economies, it devastated indigenous populations in the Americas through the introduction of smallpox and other diseases. Colonial empires grew rapidly as Spain established control over large parts of Central and South America, exploiting vast resources and indigenous labor. In North America, the British, French, and Dutch set up their own colonies. The transatlantic slave trade also emerged during this time, with millions of Africans forcibly taken from their homelands and shipped to the Americas to work on plantations. This brutal system became a cornerstone of the Atlantic economy, generating immense wealth at a horrific human cost. The Protestant Reformation dramatically changed the religious and political map of Europe. Sparked by Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517, the Reformation challenged the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and led to the formation of Protestant churches. The Reformation led to a series of religious conflicts, including the 30 Years' War starting in 1618, a devastating conflict that involved much of Europe and resulted in significant destruction and loss of life. In response to the Reformation, the Catholic Church launched the Counter-Reformation, aiming to reform internal practices and reaffirm Catholic doctrine. The scientific revolution also unfolded during the 16th and 17th centuries and fundamentally challenged humanity's understanding of the natural world. Thinkers such as Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and Newton challenged traditional views of the universe. Copernicus proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system, while Galileo used the telescope to observe celestial bodies, supporting Copernican theory despite opposition from the Church. Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, outlined the laws of motion and universal gravitation, becoming a cornerstone of modern physics. The Enlightenment emerged in the 18th century as an intellectual movement emphasizing reason, individual rights, and skepticism of authority. Philosophers like John Locke, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau questioned traditional hierarchies and promoted ideas of liberty, democracy, and the social contract. Enlightenment ideas inspired political change across Europe and the Americas, specifically in the American and French revolutions. During this era, powerful centralized states began to emerge, marking a shift away from the fragmented feudalism of the Middle Ages. In France, the Bourbon dynasty established absolute monarchy. In England, tensions between monarchy and parliament led to the English Civil War, the execution of King Charles I in 1649, and the eventual Glorious Revolution of 1688, which established constitutional monarchy. Economically, the period witnessed the beginnings of capitalism. European nations sought to accumulate wealth through trade, colonization, and the establishment of monopolies. The commercial revolution expanded banking, investment, and global trade networks. In Asia, powerful empires like the Ottoman Empire, Mughal India, and Qing China remained dominant forces, though they began to face challenges from expanding European influence. Art and culture also flourished in the early modern era. The Renaissance, which began in Italy in the 14th century, spread throughout Europe and celebrated humanism, classical learning, and artistic achievement. By 1800, the early modern era had radically altered the world. Though filled with conflict and exploitation, it was also an age of tremendous progress and intellectual awakening, forever shaping the modern world. Features of the modern era was the Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in the late 18th century and spread throughout Europe, North America, and eventually the world. This revolution dramatically changed economies by shifting from manual labor and agrarian production to mechanized manufacturing. Factories, steam engines, railroads, and new machinery revolutionized industries like textiles, transportation, and mining. Urbanization increased as people moved to cities for work, and new social classes, such as the industrial working class, emerged. While the Industrial Revolution improved productivity and living standards for many, it also led to harsh labor conditions, child labor, and severe environmental consequences. The 19th century was also a period of revolutionary political change. Inspired by Enlightenment ideas, in the American and French revolutions, people across Europe and the Americas demanded liberty and equality. The Napoleonic Wars from 1803 to 1815 sparked the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte in France, reshaped Europe, and spread revolutionary ideals. After Napoleon's defeat, the Congress of Vienna attempted to restore conservative monarchies, but nationalist and liberal movements continued to grow. In 1848, a wave of revolutions swept across Europe, driven by demands for constitutional government and national unification. The unifications of Italy and Germany in 1871 were major political developments. Germany, under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, emerged as a powerful and industrialized nation-state. Meanwhile, European imperial powers expanded their global influence during the 19th century, colonizing vast territories in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. The scramble for Africa and colonial rivalries intensified global tensions, while indigenous populations often suffered under foreign domination and exploitation. The early 20th century was defined by two world wars that reshaped global politics and society. World War I was triggered by a complex web of alliances, nationalism, militarism, and the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. The war introduced modern warfare, including trench combat, tanks, machine guns, and chemical weapons. It ended with the Treaty of Versailles, which imposed heavy reparations on Germany and redrew borders in Europe and the Middle East, sowing the seeds for future conflict. The interwar years were defined by economic instability, specifically the Great Depression of the 1930s, which led to widespread unemployment and political extremism. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power, promoting fascism, militarism, and anti-Semitism. This led to World War II, the deadliest conflict in history. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan sought territorial expansion, while the Allied powers, including the United States, Soviet Union, and United Kingdom, fought to stop them. The war ended with the defeat of the Axis powers, the use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the beginning of the nuclear age. After World War II, the world entered the Cold War, a period of geopolitical tension between the capitalist West, led by the United States, and the communist East, led by the Soviet Union. This conflict involved proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, as well as a nuclear arms race and space competition. The Cold War influenced every aspect of international relations until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, which resulted in the end of communism in Eastern Europe. The modern era has also witnessed unprecedented advances in science and technology. The invention of electricity, the telephone, and later the computer and the internet revolutionized communication in daily life. The 20th century saw humans land on the moon in 1969, mapping the human genome and creating technologies that have connected people across the globe. Medicine advanced dramatically, eradicating diseases like smallpox and significantly increasing life expectancy. Social and civil rights movements have played a major role in shaping modern societies. The abolition of slavery, the women's suffrage movement, civil rights movements in the United States, decolonization across Africa and Asia, and LGBTQ+ rights campaigns have all pushed the world toward greater equality and justice. Influential figures such as Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and Malala Yousafzai have become global symbols of resistance to oppression. In recent decades, globalization has linked the world more closely than ever before. International trade, migration, cultural exchange, and digital communication have transformed economies and societies. However, this era has also faced serious challenges. Climate change, acts of terror, pandemics like COVID-19, economic inequality, and political polarization. These issues continue to shape the 21st century and highlight the complexity of the modern world.